Today we are having a discussion with Zygomeb, the brain behind Optim Finance and now Ethereal DAO. So in this episode, we will be talking about stablecoins, Ethereal DAO, what does the current stablecoin designs look like, and what is he doing different with Ethereal DAO. So welcome to the conversation, Zygo.
Hi. Hello. That's me, Zygo, with behind my beautiful avatar. So no face reveal for you.
Yeah.
I mean,
No one...
people know my face. It's just mysterious.
Exactly. Mysterious as always. I believe that no one has really seen how Zygo looks like, but you are always there in the conversations, especially when it comes to new ledger architectures, the EU TXO discussions on Cardano, and brutal with your opinions. you never holds back. Some people say...
I actually do hold back, believe it or not. I do hold back. You may notice a pattern of me trying to be gentle with some projects, but that's mostly because if I start to criticize everything, and nothing will be built. And it's just this weird balance because of how few things are currently in the works on Cardano, like legit projects. I don't like to criticize legit projects, like honest builders, despite how shitty some of their opinions or ideas or protocols are. But at the same time, they are legit builders. Like criticizing them as opposed to some scam project is always like a net negative to the space. I mean, it would be a net positive if there was something better to replace them. My criticism are always sort of weighted with that in mind. If we look at the stablecoin space on Cardano, it's really sparse. There's not much happening, and in the near-term future, I think there will be more protocols building stablecoins, specifically USD stablecoins. So I think it's time to be more honest about stablecoins. And to those who have, participated and like look at because recently I did some lectures for Emergo Academy, and my favorite topic that I did was a stablecoin. So I'll be actually talking about just about the same extent of knowledge from the stablecoin.
So those people who don't know your story, let's start with how did you end up building protocols on blockchains, or how did you start?
So the thing there is that for blockchains in general, I've started looking at them in that sense that I have timestamps of like files from like 2018. Like I have a version of Geth from 2018 that I never did anything with. I just tried to sync, and it was too much for my old computer. I couldn't do anything then. I had no money. I couldn't get into it. But despite being somewhat interested with what was being done in the space, my journey into blockchain started in 2021, which is like, okay, that's a big jump. What was happening in the middle? Well, not much. I wasn't looking at it. As I had no money, I would call it studying. And in 2021, I have sought a job out and got hired by M Labs, which was and still is primarily expanding into other venues now, Cardano development shop. And I started there as a developer and started managing projects and designing the protocols. Through Cardano, I really gotten into blockchain proper and into DeFi, into business. So weird origin story as far as crypto is concerned.
Oh, yeah. So talking about what you are currently doing, can we say that Optim and Ethereal DAO is where you're active right now?
Yes. I mean, both. Yes. Despite my criticisms of Cardano and some of the areas it is, well, to be honest, in my opinion, lackluster in, there's still potential. There's still people. There's still money out there. And there's still areas in which it has been underutilized. And we aim to capitalize on that with Optim. So, it's not like we have given up on it. No, especially me, I haven't given up fully on Cardano. There's still opportunity there, but it's not utilized by us. It's frankly, just from like the business standpoint, leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
If we don't try and apply, some of the better ideas we have, which we have some really good ideas. So one of the better ones I had was the design for OADA derivative of ADA. I won't speak too much about it, but it's but it's a mix of a few protocols, and yeah, pretty degen. So
Okay, I'm hearing about OADA for the first time, but I think we can do some other episode when you can actually tell more
oh
details
yes,
about
most definitely. I don't want to reveal too much
it.
in case things change, because
Mhm.
again, it's not yet finalized, I would say.
Yeah.
So there's some pretty great ideas already in the shape that it's taken, and feasible. And by, I would say, Q1 2024 is where it should be live, and earlier if possible.
Okay, so we have some time to talk about it. What I find different in you compared to a lot of other people, like everyone is doing great work, but you are not trying to do a lot of copy paste things, but some original thoughts. That means you need some risk tolerance to go for it, but also you see an opportunity where you can build some original products where you have low competition. I think you just go for it.
Yeah. I mean, there's always, despite objectively speaking, Ethereum being the most liquid blockchain you can build on. It has the most competitive scene, and if you have a really good idea, such as I do, you should come to the sort of place which can appreciate it most. That's the general wisdom. But at the same time, well, some of the more niche protocols have an inherent extremely high risk to reward rate. Like if there's like substantially more risk and substantially more reward is what I'm saying. And with that in mind, as you go into something more niche, more early like Radix, amplifies the potential, payout function for a builder such as myself. And not just, in terms of, selling tokens, just in terms of, lack of competition, ability to deliver something that is top one. Whereas on something like Ethereum, yes, you can build it. Yes, you will find liquidity, but will it be like super top one? It's a more mature market. And can you actually build it on Ethereum? Do you need to use an L2? Well, for Ethereum, I would actually need to use an L2. Which one? And then that's actually more of a risky choice. Which one was going to actually stand the test of time? Maybe you need to do more than one. How do you deal with doing deployments on more than one L2? Do you just, deploy it there and no cross chain? Do you actually need to issue the token as like an omni token through layer 0? Do you want to introduce net dependency? And it's like little things that you have to worry about. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because in the long term, you will, run into those questions in some, more obscure L1 like Radix. Either way, but frankly, to be honest, for Radix specifically, I like the tech. And for Cardano, well, surprisingly, for how big it is, like top 9 or 10, I think. I'm not sure how the price movement has gone in recent months.
The total market cap of 9 billion, and I think around
9 billion top 9 blockchain. And how big it is, define how big it is. There's a huge hole in comparison to other things in DeFi space. It's super underutilized, which despite how sort of battle tested it is with user adoption, I would call it, because of how big the market cap is, there's a very underutilized DeFi space. And it's a land of opportunity. From that perspective, like a pure pragmatical look as to why still Cardano, why Radix, both have different sort of parameters to the equation of why them, and much the same sort of risk to reward payout. As in, yes, there's much greater risk in Radix and much greater payout. But at the same time, on Cardano, the risk is lower, right? And the reward is pretty big because it's underutilized. Because people can't build on it, don't know how. And I'm in this unique position where I've spent a lot of time actually getting to the top of, developer design ability. And I know what's possible. I know what's not. I know what's bullshit, and I know what's not. And I, need to utilize on it. So.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing right now on both these chains. Before we get into the details of Cardano or Radix, I think the most ambitious, can I say that the most ambitious project that you are building currently is Ethereal DAO?
Yes, and it's not a real comparison because of how complex the system is able to be made to be with how crypto is super expressive. Like the amount of logic and the amount of complex actions that are taking place within the protocol is not really comparable to much of anything that's being done on Cardano, because it's a system of proof DAO voting with a DSL4 voting that can execute any proposal as well, with an integrated treasury management, with an integrated management of 3 protocols, which is 2 DEXs and a stablecoin which is permissionless, integrated with permissions with respect to those DEXs, so that each of those components has special permissions with respect to one another. One DEX is 50-50, but also managed by the DAO, and the second DEX is weighted 90-10 and uses the special Radix native components. And the third component is the EUSD, which uses those DEXs for automatic arbitrage and peg keeping of that token, which again works out to be a fairly complex system if you think about it. It's not like for Ethereum standards, it's not like super out there in terms of complexity, but it's still a complex system. Especially it being so early in Radix, it's taken a while to even get the architecture right for it. It's like, how do you structure this thing? And a lot of the things I did there is, just figuring out how to structure it. And it's taken a few months to do it, yes, a few long months, which is mostly experimentation as to going through a few iterations of it and finding out how to work this new thing. And my favorite part about it is the system of native permissions. You can use a token as a part of a native permission type access rule, and this access rule is in the engine built in permission checking. You can build like a multi-sig check into an access rule that is basically just checked at the ledger level without it being your custom thing that you can fuck up. So it's just using the permission checking of just compiling it down to a finite state automaton and going through the requisite steps to transition to the final state. So this is experimental stablecoin design that is attempting to be fully decentralized, apart from an Oracle feed, fully decentralized stablecoin with crypto backing. And that's not exactly novel. That's what MiCA has done in way back when. Okay, good. But actually, what we want here is something that is as capital efficient as possible. And what we also want is a tight peg. Well, what we want is the peg that is most accepted by the standards of an algorithmic stablecoin such as Frax. And in fact, I'm aiming for the exact same, if not better, peg range of plus minus 1%.
Okay, so coming back to the point of stablecoins. So what is the main problem with stablecoins right now, algorithmic stablecoins?
Well, let's first address the algorithmic question. What is an algorithmic stablecoin? So the system autonomously chooses to make certain actions dependent on the evolving environment. So let's address the elephant in the room, the Luna situation, right? So the Luna, UST, when it was above peg, people could bring in Luna, mint UST, and sell it for profit, because the system kind of pegged Luna to UST exchange rate. It had this built-in oracle for like the entire chain. And the same thing is done for Frax. If it's above $1, the system in effect can quote unquote mint it out of thin air through the entire AMO system. And the same is for like a downward peg protection. And it's just a case of ensuring that there's a sufficient backing. So Frax does it in like a way more complicated way. But UST was fairly straightforward in a way that its peg protection worked. And there are some caveats, such as ensuring that the markets are appropriately sized, and that the sort of fee for creating it. Luna also had like this internal AMM where, the fees that were getting bigger the more of those redemptions happened. But But basically, that's the rundown of what an algorithmic stablecoin even is. So if you look at something like, for example, MakerDAO, okay, you make a CDP, but now you can also make CDPs with lower collateralization ratios. Okay, cool. But also what you can do is redeem out the stable for at least $1 worth of ETH. Okay, nice. That's very nice. So we know that it will maintain at least $1 worth on the open market. But what's the upper peg it can maintain? Oh, well, if the system has total collateralization ratio over 150%, meaning it's a normal operation, then you can create a CDP in liquidity at basically 110 collateralization ratio percent and immediately sell it, meaning the upper peg of it is $1.10. And it has maintained and been in that range for quite a while. But and obviously, this may seem algorithmic, the downward peg protection. How it works, you redeem it from the lowest collateralization ratio CDP and just go with that. It works, but that's sort of an algorithmic element to it. If you map it to, how USD's redemptions worked for, take USD, you burn it and you get $1 worth of Luna back, right? This is kind of the same thing to an onlooker, but underneath the hood, sort of EUSD maintains a backing of an exogenous asset, which is called Ethereum. It's just not minting it out of thin air.
The main problem with stablecoins comes with its capital inefficiency, right?
Yes. So in general, the highest capital efficiency was achieved by hacking it, hacked it, and they achieved infinite capital efficiency. In effect. But the second best, and there is a second best, despite what Sailor may say. No, the second best in terms of stable coins, the capital efficiency, I would personally say is Frax, and they do it by, in effect, for Frax V1. Frax V1 was partially collateralized, and it was in effect a machine for deciding what kind of collateralization ratio will the market accept. How low can we go before it starts to depeg, to the downside, to the upside? And it was regulated through, in effect, looking at the market price and deciding and adjusting the collateralization ratio with its FXS, and minted out of thin air or burnt to like redeem or mint it. And that was the entire system for Frax V1, in effect. And it achieved, under 100% collateralization ratio, meaning super high capital efficiency. But now with their Frax V3, they're actually moving to be at least or above 100% collateralization ratio. Meaning that, now they'll still be the most capital efficient due to their AMO system, but now the gap is kind of closed because it's in effect as efficient as just any stablecoin system that takes stablecoins and uses them. 100% capital efficiency because you're using dollars for it. Well, or dubious dollars, whatever the stablecoin you're using. Dubious dollars, the dollar ticket, as long as the redemptions and mints work. The centralized version of the stablecoin will be able to do its machinations. Apart from capital efficiency, that's one problem. Low capital efficiency coins tend to have problems with maintaining a peg because they are not relying on dollars most of the time, because high collateral ratios are only necessary for crypto-backed stables. So for something like Liquidity, which despite its fairly nice peg range for a fully decentralized stablecoin of 10% upwards depeg at most and 0 downwards, it still requires, for safety purposes, at the very least 150 or more percent total system collateralization ratio for its sort of normal operations to continue, meaning that upward peg protection to kick in. When people being able to create those low CR CDPs. So it's kind of marrying the high efficiency with safety aspects. And it's a pretty nice system. I really like it. And people do really like it. It's fairly well designed. Although I'm personally not a huge fan of a stability pool myself, because it lowers capital efficiency. It forces a lot of the stable coins to be kept in an inefficient state. It's just sitting there, earning yield out of thin air.
So basically what you're saying is that Frax and Liquidity are one of the most sophisticated systems out there right now.
Well, Frax is by far the most sophisticated stablecoin out there. Yes. No competition. No competition. This is the most sophisticated stablecoin out there. But the other ones are being built, and the space hasn't really stopped pushing forward. But now the space is moving towards at least 100% collateralization ratio type of deal, and it's mostly brought on due to the upcoming regulation. Like one of the most clearer, despite how unclear it is, regulations is MiCA. And again, this is not legal advice here or financial by any stretch of imagination. But what MiCA, from my perspective, says is endogenous. This is why I was using the endogenous exogenous terminology, because that's the terminology of MiCA. And MiCA says endogenous collateral is a no-no. It's like, no, you're not supposed to both mint the collateral and mint the stablecoin. That's no. And it's like a very far-reaching consequence for DeFi, because it affects like three big protocols. Luna, which already died and is a reason for this. Synthetics, which nobody really took notice of, funnily, but they're using, their SNX token as collateral, and but they're using at such egregiously high collateralization ratios required for it, and they keep changing those collateralization requirements suspiciously. But nobody really took notice that they're using that as collateral. But yes, they are affected by that. And Frax, which kind of decided to step away from actually using the endogenous collateral and make themselves more, I would say, compliant.
So the way I understand endogenous and exogenous is that you can mint a stable coin in a platform using ETH or some exogenous assets rather than the asset of this same protocol.
Basically how it's defined.
Okay.
You look at the protocol, okay, what's endogenous to the protocol, what the protocol creates versus what's exogenous, what the protocol takes in as input from other protocols. And, obviously, you can then argue that it's not really like a foolproof definition, but, the European regulations tend to be, I would call it, still, despite the things they talk about, worded in a way such that they can be sort of interpreted either way.
Oh, yeah.
That's most, because they don't rely on precedent, but rather on interpretation. So,
do you think European regulations are better than US? Like giving you some clarity is better than having no clarity?
In the US, the strongest thing you rely on is this sort of virtue of precedent, but it can be abused. Bad precedent is put into play, and then challenging the precedent is a massive undertaking. And then it's not like the European sort of courts completely did throw away precedent. There's still arguments with regards to like a precedent established, but it can go either way. It's not as strong of a feature of that system.
Okay, got it. So you have worked in the Cardano ecosystem for a while, and we have a couple of stablecoins there, DJED or iUSD. How do you see those systems?
Oh God, we're going to that one. All right. So how do I see DJED or iUSD? Which one do you want to talk about first?
Which is the biggest one? iUSD, I guess, right?
Yes, it is. Well, at least in the, market cap sort of sense. So it has dominance of currently 78%. And it's whether it deserves it or not is a different question. But, hey, it's the only option right now. And like I said, there's competition coming because, again, they got so big purely because they were the only real stable coin, decentralized, despite it not really being stable. Oh yeah.
I saw it was depegging 10% or something last couple of days back.
Yeah. It actually depegged like a week or so ago, like massively, because people started to notice. I don't know who did. There's some whale, I think, took notice of the fact that, hey, this is not really something that should be as well pegged as it is. And what I hate the most is when people say, oh, it has USD in the name, so it should be like $1. No. So one of the funniest things that happened, before we get into the criticism, is that wing riders, and this is not like really bad mouthing them, because they try to make a business sort of move there and capture the stablecoin TVL, sure. But when they announced that they were making a stable swap between iUSD and JED, in the Twitter space, I asked them, "Do you think this is a good idea?" Do not again shit talk too much on like honest builders, and it was like, "Just do you think this is a good idea?" And it didn't like want to spread fear too much because, again, DeFi systems can work with slightly different peg ranges, slightly different stability guarantees in a stable pool. For most of the time, unless the systems are taken to like an extreme level of stress. But the problem with iUSD and JED is that they have such wildly different peg ranges that is a bad idea, really, in my opinion, to push them to that stable swap. Because, the real problem is that the JED has a peg range of, 99 cents to infinity.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go as high as it wants. Nobody would be able to prevent it from going that far, despite, what you could do is like try and mint new ones, but you can't because the system actually locks. Let's start from JED, actually works, is that it's, if the system 400% CR by end of your transaction, then you can't mint. So, and you need to increase it. So if the system is at 500% CR then you can mint the JED, you can mint SHED, both. And you can mint JED, the USD stablecoin, but if it goes ever under 400% CR, then you can't mint it. You can't mint it, so you can't arbitrage it from the upside. So as high as it can. But you can always burn it so it maintains that, downward spec. On the other side, might as well explain Shen. So Shen is the sucker asset of the system, because it gives you like slight leverage on like ADA because of the previous people who failed. You can always get it for lower on an open market than you can by minting it. And there's never enough demand for the asset because you can't redeem it. When the system is under 400% CR, you can't redeem the Shen. So, the asset tends to go way down. And when it gets close to being able to be redeemed, only then starts to, move up appropriately. But it's always locked and for an unpredictably long amount of time. And you can't do anything about it. That's a sucker asset. And as a result, the system doesn't really grow as fast as it should be able to for a capital efficient token, because not only does it need that super high collateralization ratio, it also has people who provide that liquidity, be exposed to extremely bad price action. Like for you to mint Shen, you'll need to be super bullish on ADA. ADA will be so bullish that it will be unlocked soon. Then that play makes some sense, because then you get ADA and you get more exposure to ADA by Shen. So you get more ADA out of your ADA, but if it fails, you don't get your ADA back and you lose. So it's not even like a super good way to like leverage ADA, but it is a way. I will say that. But on the JED side, you get this peg range, at the very least backed by $1. Mm-hmm. And we've seen JED go, I think at most it went to like 10 cents above. I'm fairly certain it's constantly at 5-7% above, despite there being no way to like sort of arbitrage it from the upside. And there's nothing really that would prevent it from going higher. So if you were to, for example, be in an unlocked state, meaning over 400% CR, then yes, it actually does have an upward peg protection. And it's like within like 1%, I think, as well, like 1 plus 1 minus 1, roughly. So you mint, take the fee, and sell it. From like the normal system operation standpoint, it's a pretty nice spread. Mm-hmm. But the problem with like the stablecoin systems is that if the system tends to like gravitate towards the place in which it doesn't have a good way out of escaping from, then tends to stay in that place for a long time. So if you look at Ethereum in comparison, for example, the version in the light paper is actually outdated. What I've noticed is that the system also tends to be in the non-efficient state for quite some time. And this was actually addressed with the latest version of the system, where has more stronger incentives to people engaged in it. Obviously, there being no sucker asset and there being no lock on like people minting it. So it's always going to be like more protected from the upside. And at worst, the ethereal system gets like slightly more inefficient, and it still can if it doesn't maintain a sufficient degree of collateralization for automatic arbitrage to take place. But I believe that with the incentives in place, it should not be going to that place. So if you look at our article of Ethereal USD, L% is greater than A%, you will understand how this is achieved. And I want you to, like, to anybody listening, to look at it from the perspective of, oh, if the system goes under the collateralization ratio of where it is able to efficiently, maintain the upward peg range, what kind of market force is there to push the collateralization back up so that it can partake in that automatic arbitrage? And you will find that, well, it's the case where actually it's not the one in the title, because stablecoins get minted and assets get increased. So in that sense, A% is over L%. But that's, getting like into the weeds of it. Perspective of DJED. I think DJED is the simplest possible algorithmic stablecoin you can design. Because the system may die down to like 105% collateralization ratio before people redeem any stable coins. There's no protection. It can go as low as possible, and nobody would redeem. And the only time when people would start redeeming is when, they are afraid that the peg will be lost. The system will go under collateralized. And then they actually start redeeming.
So considering iUSD and DJED, there is a real market for stablecoins in Cardano.
Yes,
so
a very big one.
Yeah, being a builder in Cardano, why are you building Ethereal in Radix?
Well, Ethereal wouldn't be possible to be built on Cardano. It has high, and I mean high, need for throughput. Okay. I mean, really, the question is, it would be most probably fitting to be going on an L2, some Solana type, or, I mean, Radix has, good throughput. It's a BFT type chain with, lowish fees. So I think it's suitable for like at least, high throughput demand, like extreme throughput demand. This is like just a high throughput demand because it needs that 1% protection. It needs so it's like people to quickly adjust their positions based on the price action of XOD TOE. And, I wouldn't be able to build a system of that complexity in Cardano because of the current state of DEXs. Cardano needs to improve its DEXs massively to be able to handle a system that is, worrying about peg protection from that aspect. And, for anything that worries about peg protection, it needs to be endogenous to the system. And it can't just take like as a guard the market price. It has to be, directly redeeming, or directly minting. It can't be just, going to the DEX, because what Ethereal does is like mint to the DEX and sell, or burn from a DEX by moving assets into it. So, and that's the difference, right? Because of how interoperable Cardano DEXs are. This has been one of my biggest criticisms of Cardano, and Cardano DEXs specifically, is the batcher model. Popularized by Sunday and then, taken by MinSwap, the batcher model of DEXs has been making a decent, throughput out of Cardano DEXs, but at the same time, it has been destroying any notion of interoperability that Cardano could have by leveraging the UTXO model. And it could have a much greater degree of interoperability. And I suppose if Cardano is to survive, then what we need on Cardano is standards and like a push in an interoperability direction, which I believe has actually happened. The last DEX that came out, Spectrum, I won't comment on the economics of the token, but I'm a big fan of their
permissionless batching system.
Yeah. Yes, permissionless batching model. And the biggest reason why the permission batcher model was made is not out of greed, although greed is certainly a part of it, because you can rake up insane amount of money from processing like tons and tons of batcher orders, despite each being 2 ADA in price. Can rake in insane amounts, and they have, The Miniswap Labs has raked in a lot of money from, operating those batchers. But that's not really a reason. The reason why Sunday Labs has decided to go with a permission batcher system and not run it themselves, but at the same time, their reason was that a non-permission batcher system, an open batcher system, would lead to those batchers reordering transactions, and it would. Don't get me wrong, it would. But at the same time, they have not considered the impact it would have on DeFi. Complete inability to DeFi systems to integrate with those DEX. I mean, you can't just look at the current price right now with Lotus V2 and above, but you cannot execute an order in the same transaction and see its output, and that's what DeFi systems want.
Basically, what made DeFi great on Ethereum is the ability to seamlessly interoperate between protocols. That's
yes. Atomically, most important. Like, see, okay, this is the price we execute. Is it possible to now get this out? Okay, if we didn't get out that much, revert.
Yeah, when talking about atomic composability, people understand that, okay, why would I need, like, they are talking from like a normal user perspective. Oh, I need to make a swap. Why does it matter for me if it's atomic or not? But I think when you make a sophisticated order, like combining different protocols and designing the systems, you need that capability to make that work, to have that kind of possibility, right? Maybe you can explain us like what atomic composability means and where you need it.
So coming from the perspective of Radix and their take on atomic composability, I want to make mention that when they talk about atomic composability, they mean atomic composability between shards. So their ledger in the future will be sharded. So that's what they mean when, between shards, you can atomically make transactions without any sort of stake sync between, that it could be reverted, and it's happening as the transaction gets confirmed. So, that's the atomic composability in their sense. But, composability and atomic composability in DeFi in general, what it means is that, for example, if I wanted to improve iUSD and was like, oh, now iUSD, for whatever means, protects the peg from upside and downside. Okay, cool. How does it do that? Well, does it just allow anybody to mint, or just allow anybody to burn? Okay. Well, that would be, one way to do it. But another way to do it would be to, okay, do we have the current price feed? Okay, if we have the current price feed, meaning actual DEX price of the token, if it's not in line with our peg range, backstops, then the system mints or burns through whatever means, right? And it needs to be able to execute that and, probably make profit off of it, right? But it can't do that because we first need to make an order on those DEXs, and then it would need to handle the, timeout on that order because it may not get processed at all, ever. And then, cancel it then and handle the canceling, which may not even be like a very simple thing. And it just adds like a lot of complexity there, and then make another one potentially. And it's just so much complexity added to just what is in effect just a single function call on Ethereum. It's laughable, really, at the state of composability of Cardano, because of this decision to have this intermediary batcher. And from like a perspective of a user, they don't really, users are fine with like making an order. If everybody just makes those limit orders to the DEX, that's fine. If we have to live with those as like users, that's fine. But as far as the protocols are concerned, what is the ideal state of a DEX for a protocol is that, okay, we as a protocol want to grab the UTXO of that protocol and execute it against it directly, so that we know that this is the end result of that execution. And, in place of deterministic transactions, it's not going to be like fun to execute that directly, because you'd be effectively running against the batchers, executing user orders, which means that, to process it, you need a nice fee market, or else you're, constantly getting rejected. But you absolutely can do it. And I believe that would be like if not like final version, then at least an intermediary. Okay, we can now build DeFi on top of this type of architecture.
So the way I understand it, Cardano was built with a lot of off-chain components in mind. With taking things off-chain is bad for composability. That's where.
Yes. So in general, what happens is that if the computation and transaction creation happens off-chain, meaning you need to be able to know exactly how to, interface with those UTXOs. You need to create the transaction appropriately. You basically need to know their logic so that your transaction doesn't get rejected because you included like another input that shouldn't have been there, and you included them or you incorrectly ordered the outputs, or one output is, has some value it shouldn't have. Like little things like that, where it makes it harder to create those transactions. And since they happen deterministically, you know the output, that this is indeed the transaction that will go through if it goes through. But at the same time, if you don't have like a good grasp of what those systems require, you can't interface with them.
So that's why you cannot build what you're building right now on Cardano.
It's that, plus also the lack of interoperability, plus the low ledger speeds, and plus high finality times. Incredibly high finality times. More of a case of throughput than finality, but if finality is, if throughput is high and finality is also high, then, you can run into extremely bad situations. If throughput is high, then the requirement on finality is that it needs to be lower.
Okay.
And, it's either Nakamoto or BFT. And BFT is basically, a couple of seconds. It's either a couple of seconds or a couple of hours between BFT and Nakamoto.
Most of them are going for this PBFT, like fast finality systems, because that's what needed for DeFi, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly straightforward system. It just works. It's simple. You can say, oh, well, it has this, semi-synchronous assumption, and, everybody knows the what it's going to be. You can try and DDoS, certain participants. It's leader schedule is not exactly private, etc. But, so comparing Ethereal to anything that exists is kind of hard because it's in the final, I would say, iteration, with possibly, small adjustments coming in the future. And by the way, the code is already written in open source. So how does the Ethereal CDP, ECDP work? Is that you have LP in the total assets of the system and LP in total liabilities of the system instead of having like a fixed number on either side. What this allows us to do is just like adjust those numbers as, actions are taken on the system, specifically liquidations and automatic arbitrage. So our automatic arbitrage allows the system to basically adjust the values of assets LP and the liabilities LP, either both down or both up, which makes certain, either assets win or liabilities win, which encourages people to put up more assets or mint more liabilities in certain system states. And by the way, when liquidation happening increases both assets and liabilities of everybody, which means it uses the sort of liquidation of last result method. But due to the way the system, treats assets and liabilities of each individual ECDP, this allows the system to sort of implicitly say, okay, if liquidations happen, then the system needs to have more assets in it. So it encourages people to deposit more assets and liquidations happen. If at the same time, if like, if stablecoin DPX to the upside, and this was what I was talking about, the system not locking in a weird, inefficient state. If the stablecoin has the peg to the upside, because, it couldn't mint automatically or whatever, the collateralization ratio was too low for it to automatically trigger, the arbitrage, which I call mandatory pegging. So now the collateralization is under that point of efficiency. So now, somebody can deposit a lot, bring the collateralization, total collateralization ratio back up over that threshold, and the system immediately, almost immediately, as upon the next swap on index, which you can do like within the same transaction as you deposit, will trigger automatic arbitrage, which moves those mints those stable coins, sells them, brings those assets, which increases both liabilities and assets of the system, which means everybody's assets LP increases and everybody's liabilities and LP increases. But if you have like more assets percent than liabilities percent, with respect to the total liabilities and assets of the system, as in, so you take your own liabilities LP and divided by total liabilities LP, that's your liabilities percentage. And the same with assets. And if you have one percentage bigger than the other, then you are sort of positioned to take advantage of either downward protection or upward protection and liquidations. So here, if upward protection is needed, and in this sort of for the system to push up TCR, right? You deposit, and then you interact with the DEX to trigger that automatic arbitrage. Now the system has increased both assets and liabilities, and now whatever amount you have minted, in fact, doesn't matter. You could have like basically zero liabilities with that action. You could have had zero liabilities in that action. And what you have had done is like a free arbitrage of the system by depositing like a huge amount of assets into the system. And now they have been increased because all the profits from this arbitrage have gone to you basically. And due to this sort of interaction, the system never really locks in that, inefficient state because it's like then there's like a free and atomic way you can take advantage of that upwards deep, right?
Wait.
Because, and then in the same transaction, you can also withdraw those assets after, increasing them and at no risk, basically. Take advantage of this upward depeg, which is, by the way, like within 1% range. So this is like a super easy way. And this is what I was talking about because of those sort of risk-free actions you can take, like especially with like the upward depeg. You can, since everybody wants to keep rebalancing themselves to keep advantage either upward or downward, in the system, has a high requirement of throughput. Everybody's trying to, adjust themselves on the go. It's a bot warfare type of system.
So that means you need a high throughput, fast finality system for this to work.
Very much so. And it cannot be like deterministic at a transaction level. So Cardano kind of falls out the window almost immediately. And thanks to Radix's sort of intent-based transactions, but really it would work with just Ethereum's sort of message system, kind of the same, but, less safe. Or just, Ethereum intents, it's the same thing. You are able to, adjust those quickly and not worry about the previous state because, by the time you sign and submit, the system could have changed 15 times from when you have constructed that transaction.
Okay, got it. So what are we looking forward for Ethereal? So the launch, is there a public testnet or like a public demo?
Yeah. So the public testnet, like a public one, should happen like in the near future, actually. We have a fairly good, working solution, deployed, not necessarily like fully like, bug free because, we're still taking our time doing that. I'm still working on like an airdrop script for deploy for like the mainnet, for like the pre-mainnet launch of the entire DAO. And there's the, and there's the Oracle, which is actually already done and feeding things into the testnet version. But there's also, the entire liquidation bot that I need to do. That's going to be like more painful than the Oracle.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But it's coming soon. That's what I
Yes. I mean, we can do like the deployment like next week. But yeah. Mainnet shouldn't be like too long after, but still, given that currently there are no audits and it's just open source. I mean, I've had like an auditor reach out to me already, and it's like, with their obviously, super high prices, and I was like, fucking like, look at that number. And it's not like I trust them to, be of any higher understanding of the system than I am. Like an auditor needs like a large basic understanding and time building to properly be able to assess those systems. And otherwise it's just a ripoff, really. And the moot statement, because, in Ethereum, like as a comparison, like something like Certic seems to be mostly a rubber stamp and a general agreed upon situation with them.
I have seen the memes. I think I have heard this from Emin Günsira of Avalanche. One of the reasons why they went with the C chain with EVM because it's easy to get a
audit security
exactly.
assessment. There's lots of people looking into it. If it's insecure, then either white hats or bug bounty hunters will start to look into things and help you with that. And here in like the most obscure chains, even help Cardano, as big as it is with small developer base, you just can't get that easily.
So talking about the security in a system like Radix, where like I have just played around with it, you have this transaction manifest where you can get assurances on the outcome of the transaction.
Full assurances,
Yeah.
actually. System in manifest, which is effectively, to those who don't know what that is, it's like an intent. You see, your wallet, like what you will be like withdrawing from your account and depositing into it, what, proofs you're presenting, what dApps are you using, sort of that information presented to you. And, if you can, look at it and say, okay, that's fine. And then, you execute it, and suddenly, you would think that, oh, well, but those outputs are completely, variable, right? No, they're not. At the wallet level, and even, at the manifest level, which is equivalent, there's an insertion, and actually wallet inserts that. Wallet inserts an assertion that a certain number of outputs are present. And of course, those assets are native, which is why, it's possible to do that in the first place.
So that means you are getting this guarantee that, okay, I can see the outcome. Like a lot of time it happens on Ethereum that you click something, you have no guarantee about the outcome because there's no assurances at a wallet level. Yeah. So you are trying to deploy this new protocol that what you're building on a system where there are some basic guarantees on what works and what does not work.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest problem of Ethereum is that, somehow it gets exploited and the peg can no longer be maintained through whatever daisy chain of events. That's the biggest risk, right?
Yes.
Since it's a young tech, basically, even after, mainnet launch, will just be like screaming and saying, oh, if you've deposited into it, it's like, there's many risks, because we have to be, fair about it. And, proceed cautiously with it.
Okay.
And this is not really a good way to do it otherwise.
Okay, got it. So moving on to the next topic about native assets. So how has a platform with native assets helped you from a developer perspective to work with things? How has it made the work easier or uncomplicated?
It has made the work easier. Like with native assets, interacting with smart contracts is making it have this layer of, okay, we're actually dealing with the financial engine that was dealing with concrete assets here. And okay, once you get beyond that assumption, you can have this layer of, okay, we want to be able to do this, and that with assets. Okay, what's possible, what's not. The system, the engine itself can track the asset movement, ensuring there's no like bugs. The wallet can display back in Radix the capabilities of an asset. If you look at an asset, you will know as the assets can increase in supply and decrease in supply both. There's a simple token is one that does not increase in supply or doesn't have like any freezing in anything. If you can modify the metadata, you will know that somebody can modify metadata of the asset, or anybody can modify the data. We will know all those properties of the asset because of, once again, the finite state automaton that is, behind that access rule, which, for each of those permissions, for example, an asset can have a permission of, oh, this asset is freezable. Okay, by whom? And you will know in this asset, okay, somebody can freeze this asset, meaning, you wouldn't be able to move it. Or somebody can, only somebody can withdraw this asset from like a vault, which is in effect, also what your account holds. Okay. So does that mean every single asset is like permission on Radix? No. This is in fact something opt-in. You can opt in for your assets to be like recallable, redeemable, freezable, and I don't think you'll see many that do that. But you happen to somebody that needs that feature, you will absolutely be able to use it. You will be able to see in your wallet that, oh, I received this token. You click on it, and it has this behavior. Oh, this asset is freezable. Oh, that's curious. I didn't know that. And this is in opposition to something like Ethereum, where you really don't know if you will be able to, for example, if an asset is in a honeypot, right? Buy into an asset. A lot of the time, if it's like an early launch of a shitcoin, you just look at it and oh, now I can sell it on DEX. Oops, got rugged again. I bought into a honeypot.
Exactly. Cardano and Radix both have native assets. But
But
the way it works is a bit different.
Yes. So what Cardano assets can do is it's like a dumber native asset than Radix's, but it's still like a smart native asset in the sense that, yes, you can have a smart contract that governs when you mint it and burn it, but that's it. all the capabilities of a Cardano asset is like, okay, so the only behavior, like looking at it from like a Radix perspective, is that, okay, this asset can be mintable and burnable. There's no like freezing on Cardano possible, even opt-in. There's no recall possible. There's no additional features. It's like a dumb asset. And, it's not even easy to make those dumb assets. So you can't even like look at it was the actual logic behind who can mint it or not.
Here it is much more, you can finally define how this asset should, like in Radix, should behave, in which framework it should. Okay.
Yes. And it's kind of like a bigger sort of toolbox for a developer. Again, somebody wants to make a feasible asset. Yes, absolutely they can. If somebody wants to make a recallable asset, yes, absolutely they can. Somebody wants an NFT that, a DAO can modify the metadata of. Absolutely they can. Multisig, they can. Absolutely. It just comes down to the flexibility of it. In Cardano, it's kind of crippled. Because metadata is only made possible to be changed via CIP 8068, which, despite how divisive it was, it just enables that capability and people can use it, which is good. But still, only being limited at an asset level to minting and burning has been a problem, because now, despite how much you could pay and say, oh, Circle won't come because IO or whoever won't pay them to come, no, they want assets to be freezable, at the very least. So, that's a big problem, and Cardano won't be able to provide that unless, that's changed.
I mean, nobody wants to be hunted down by some kind of, government. So everyone would like to comply, and you just need some framework so that you can design the systems which goes with like that kind of compliance. And if you issue some USD backed stablecoin, then you may need that capability, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm wondering how Mehen, and they were making the case that you don't need.
Yeah, so that's Mehen's take, and obviously you need to take it with a grain of salt. And it's their sort of design, and they believe they can make it work. Whether it will or not, this is an entirely different aspect. But the route that the biggest stablecoins have taken is having that freezing capability. And I think once, and this is not an if, this is a once a big hack happens in Cardano, and lots of stablecoins, among other things, there are lots of tokens in general are now sort of owned by a hacker sense, and people get mad. And now there are lots of stablecoins that are owned by a hacker, and now those systems get infected. You will see lots of discussion and lots of people actually wanting them to be freezable. And, that's a risk they run. And, I bet then, and if that happens, when that happens, not if, once again, you will see people turn around and actually, ask themselves whether Mehen is as safe as they claim to be. Or there will be doubts whether they can, survive that. Because once those tokens get mixed in, for example, with a DEX, now everybody's tokens are sort of infected by a hacker. I mean that, you can trace the UTXO sort of chain of transactions to a DEX, and from the DEX, now everybody who provided liquidity is now infected by this chain of transaction coming from a hacker. And now they are scared shitless if they'll be, included in whatever. But generally, hackers tend to want to, escape to, a more base asset. They don't really, hold stablecoins. But and there has been a feature of a system where stablecoins are frozen, basically, very quickly. So I don't know how it will turn out on Cardano, but this is something to keep in mind. I'm looking forward to, seeing where that goes with.
And moving on to opt-in. So what is coming new on opt-in?
So I mentioned the OADA, so that's coming. It's an ADA derivative that we're aiming at. There's a lot of things, but I don't want to reveal too much. But the thing I will reveal is that the OADA token will be a yield stripped token, meaning it's just ADA. There's no staking on governance rights on it. And we want you to do something like that, and then do something else with the stake and rest of it, where it is actually enhancing the yield on staking. That's one thing we're working on in the near future, and we believe it has potential of high impact on Cardano, and it will probably be one of the most degen products you can have, like in general builds.
we have seen that there are enough degens on Cardano with the meme coin season and everything. So this will be,
Surprisingly, but we'll see if there's like DeFi degens.
yeah. So hopefully this is a new, a new space you're going into.
It's trying to marry the needs of sort of traders, sort of stability seekers, just simple yield and degens. And it's all married in this one nice package, straightforward, not very complex yield where it's coming from, despite it having some complexity to the degen part. But yeah, that's the current design of it. I don't want to speak too much too early, but yeah, it's based. It's not pulled out of thin air. It's based on some Ethereum protocols. About it in the coming weeks.
Yeah. So this is a good enough teaser.
Yeah, it's a good enough teaser, and by end of the month, that's maybe that there'll be some articles, like a basic overview of it will be released. But we'll see. We'll see. Right now, we're preoccupied with the token launch for Optim. So
fantastic. So I think we have talked about Ethereal and whatever you can talk about OADA and Optim. Would you like to talk about some other topic?
Yeah. So I think what we've done is talk about when talking about the available stablecoins on Cardano. I've spoken about DJED, and then trailed into the other things, and mentioned that iUSD doesn't work well with the same peg range as DJED, and really I don't think I mentioned why. So iUSD in effect is a copy of Liquidity, with stripped down features, stripped down safety features, and most importantly, stripped down redemption.
Okay.
What this means is that there is no lower peg. There's no downside protection.
Okay.
If you think about it, what people want from a stablecoin is first and foremost the downside protection. If they buy on the open market for higher than $1, that's on down. That's why upside DPEGs are not so common, and why it hasn't gone to infinity, because people aren't willing to buy and bet on it, which that may change. But generally, upwards DPEGs are still, a concern that needs to be handled, but they're not as big of a threat to the stable coin. Sure, you need to be aware that, there is a reliable way for you to defend against them. But truthfully, what happens is that if there is a downside DPEG and somebody bought or even minted it and sold, now if they sold, well, that's good for them. But if they held on to it, then now this worth less, not worthless, but it's simply worthless. And especially if somebody bought it on the open market at par, and now it's worth 90 cents. Oop, they're not going to like that. That's not a good stable coin, is it?
Yeah.
So that's in first and foremost that principal protection that stable coins should offer, with a lower bound and a very robust lower bound there. It's a necessity. Stablecoins that don't provide that really should be argued that we should not regard them as stablecoins, really. Because, if there's no downside protection and it can't go as low as it wants to, what are we talking about? No DeFi protocol is going to take that as stable coin, seriously, in the sense that, we can't take it as collateral. A stable coin collateral, we can't take as collateral. What does that tell you about the stable coin? That it's not stable. It's not a stable coin. Unstable. It's worthless, actually.
You cannot create any other assumptions around that, especially when it's not stable.
And there's a protocol that I won't name by name because I'm not sure if it's a scam or not, but there's a protocol on Cardano proposing that they'll be taking your iUSDs and converting them to USDT on Tron. And I have absolutely no idea how that's going to work. And maybe they're betting on the redemption being added. And if the redemption being added, then that's a more sane protocol, but still it's pretty much a weird gamble.
So I think we had a nice long conversation about a lot of stuff. And with Zygomeb, you can talk for hours. And I think we will be back in a couple of months again, talking about the new products he's launching.
Thank you for hosting me, Ben, and I'll be glad to come back anytime.